So as always, the first thing that we do is examine our slide on low power. And the first thing that we begin to appreciate is that at this power, we have a relatively intact basket weave stratum corneum noted. The epidermis at this power seems to show some mild effacement of the rete, and there seems to be very mild perivascular inflammation noted at this power. Let's take a look at higher power. Now at higher power we can begin to appreciate some more distinctive features to the specimen. Again, we have a mostly intact basket weave stratum corneum. Within the epidermis we see many pink apoptotic or dyskeratotic keratinocytes. Now these cells are located along the basal layer, but we can also see cells extending into the mid and upper epidermis. Let's take a look on higher power. Again, at higher power we can appreciate areas of vacuolar change along the basal layer. Dyskeratotic or apoptotic keratinocytes are noted, with several cells extending into the upper epidermis. We can even see a few melanophages within the papillary dermis, and this is not uncommon. As we begin to zoom out, we can appreciate some lymphocytes lining up along the dermal-epidermal junction and the presence of vacuolar changes, again, along the dermal-epidermal junction. Many consider Erythema multiforme to be essentially along a spectrum with toxic epidermal necrolysis. As one might expect, as the number of apoptotic or dyskeratotic cells tends to accumulate, you can have separation of the epidermis from the dermis with the formation of a subepidermal blister and eventual necrosis of the entire epidermis, which would be something more characteristic of toxic epidermal necrolysis. Now, this specimen also emphasizes that the inflammation present in Erythema multiforme tends not to be very heavy. There are cases where you can see more of a lichenoid inflammatory infiltrate, but in this particular instance we have more of an interface inflammatory infiltrate composed predominantly of lymphocytes. Certainly some histiocytes are present. You certainly may also see eosinophils as well, and this becomes a more important point in differentiating Erythema multiforme, say, from graft versus host disease. It would be very rare to see a significant number of eosinophils in graft versus host disease, but you may certainly see them in Erythema multiforme, although they are not necessary for the diagnosis. What are some of the other features of this lesion that we can note that may help us to differentiate this from to help differentiate this from graft versus host disease? Well, the first thing is the stratum corneum. Remember that Erythema multiforme tends to be an acute event, so the stratum corneum tends to stay fairly intact. Now, if someone were to biopsy a lesion that were several days old, it would not be uncommon to find some parakeratosis present, but typically one would find more hyperkeratosis and parakeratosis in graft versus host disease than one would typically see in Erythema multiforme. Both diseases can be characterized by dyskeratotic keratinocytes, although the presence of these apoptotic or dyskeratotic cells in both the upper and lower epidermis tends to be more characteristic of Erythema multiforme. Sometimes pleva can show a significant number of dyskeratotic keratinocytes. However, in pleva, we typically see more of a serum crust present within the stratum corneum. The inflammatory infiltrate tends to be both superficial and deep, and wedge-shaped as well.